Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Utah Businesses live stream. We've been going live every Friday with industry insiders. And today we are talking with Erin Mendenhall, who's the mayor of Salt Lake City, Nick Norris, who's the planning director for Salt Lake City, and Jason Winkler, who's the CEO and co-founder of Industry and the developer behind the Granary District. I'm Elle Griffin. I'm the editor-in-chief of Utah Business Magazine, and we are going to be talking about the future of downtown Salt Lake City. So I thought I'd kick us off by starting with where we are right now. So a lot has happened in the last couple of months. Things are looking a lot different. How we're using, living, and working in Salt Lake City has drastically changed over the last couple of months. And Erin, you've been really instrumental in kind of making some changes to the city as far as implementing the Stay Safe, Stay Active streets, so we can now walk and bike around the city more easily, making restaurants and businesses able to put people on the sidewalk in front of their business, which helps with social distancing. Can you just talk about some of those measures and how they're playing out on a local level?
Sure. Our city has been through a lot in the last many months, from obviously the pandemic in early March and earthquakes in mid-March, and now a movement that is afoot, and protests on our streets, and almost on a daily basis, sometimes several a day. And so we're in an incredible moment of opportunity, recognizing that there's a lot of loss and pain and processing that is accompanying this. But I think this is what we see. These are the ingredients of change if you look back through the history of our nation. And so I'll just say that I'm still really happy to be in this role. I'm humbled to be the mayor at this time. And I am, every morning I'm excited to get to work on the change that isn't just supported by few who, get engaged in politics, the relatively few who get engaged in politics during normal times, but the mandate from our public to create the city that we need and desperately want for Salt Lake City's future. And that is a city of equity. That's a city that looks through a lens of equity and sustainability to every aspect of our future. So these crises, particularly the pandemic and the earthquake, gave us an opportunity to put on the ground some things that maybe would have taken a lot longer otherwise. And when you couple that with the conversations and the changes that we need right now around racial equity, which is part of geographic equity, housing equity, food access, economic access equity, we are moving. We are going to be seeing some major shifts as a city, and I'm excited for that. I'll have to give a shout out to Nick Norris. I'm grateful that he's on this panel with us today, and all of the Salt Lake City team, who I think are some of definitely the best in the state, and if not in the nation, who are helping us find ideas from other cities and innovate on those, like the Open Streets program, which our transportation department, in the network of conversation with other transportation departments, said, hey, parks are packed, people need to get out, we need them to be able to do so safely. We've always looked at places like Amsterdam and longed for bike-filled streets. Here we are seeing a dozen of those in Salt Lake City today, or the opportunity for people to do that, and hearing from a lot of people who are saying, hey, we want these things to stay. So we haven't made any of those commitments yet, but we want to keep hearing from business owners and from residents about how it impacts their lives and their economies. But we're open to these conversations in the future. So it's an incredible time of being able to pilot ideas, learn from other cities, and put things on the ground quickly. And I'd be happy to go into any other of the things that we've worked on with regard to COVID, but there's been a lot that's been happening in the last 6 months overall.
Yeah, I have one of the Stay Safe, Stay Active streets right by my house, and
Awesome.
my friends, my husband have been using it every single day. And I know we always say, oh, I wish this was like this permanently. It's so great. And I know, Nick, you're pretty vocal about that as well. You've been pointing out on Twitter, things Paris and Milan are doing as far as semi-permanent or permanent solutions. and are kind of vocal about saying, make our city more walkable and bikeable. So do you see there being some permanency factor involved with making our city more viable for the pedestrians and the cyclists?
Well, yeah, I think there has to be, and I think every city that's looking towards the future. I think there's three key things that I think need to happen, and there are certainly some leaders around the world that are doing that. I think they have to be more inclusive. We have to be more adaptable, and we have to have a whole new meaning of what health and safety mean. And so all of those things are leading towards a complete change in viewpoint on everything from zoning policies to housing policies, street maintenance. All of those things are starting to change. And so I think we're in a period where the current events are, I mean, they're not creating an opportunity. They're basically demanding something change. And I think that cities need to be at the forefront of that. And whether we want to or not, we're going to have to. And I think that's a good thing. And so I think it's important to be able to lead out and take some chances, recognize you're not going to do it perfectly, and see how it goes, and then see what we can do to make better cities.
Elle, can I chime in on that one more? We know that live, work, play, proximity, which is I know a big piece of why Jason's on this panel with us so appropriately, is key not only to the desire of people across the age spectrum who are wanting to be able to walk to recreation, walk to cultural experiences, walk to work, get their groceries, and be there. We've known that a long time, and that's why we built a transit master plan that we finished a few years ago. It's why we're using tax dollars to insist that UTA run buses where we know our residents need them, which at this point we have those 3 bus lines on 2nd South, 9th South, and 21st South. We have a 6th North and 10th North bus line coming soon, where we're running buses. We're paying for it for every 15 minutes or less, basically 6 days a week, and then more service on Sundays than we've ever had before. So how we look at those frequent transit networks, which is those lines that we're talking about, the kind where you don't have to even check a schedule, you just know the bus is coming and it's going to stay in Salt Lake City. You're not going to end up in Sandy or West Valley City when you hop on that bus. That kind of reliability is it's a game changer for development. And so when we look to Nick's department about now how are we zoning to allow for not just the access and perhaps greater density along these lines, but economic access. So then we're talking about affordability being built in to that livable infrastructure of the future that we have in a sort of spotty way around the city today, unless you live in the downtown core. So it's exciting that Nick is an incredible planning director and his team is also. So we have the people tools to make this a reality. And I think we have the political will with our city council as well to make this happen quickly.
Is that a priority to try to get more cars out of the city?
Oh yeah, I'm trying not to use too strong of words here, but I mean, great cities across the world are not car-based in their entirety. They're multimodal, so it's everything from bikes and pedicabs and being able to walk and shared mobility, the rideshare modalities. It's everything, and it's things that we haven't even seen yet. You know, if we would have had this call 4 years ago, we would not have known that electric scooters were going to be in our city the way they are today. So we're also building a new transportation master plan, which we haven't had in over 2 decades, to help us from the infrastructure side make sure that we're anticipating and incorporating in the most human-friendly ways all of these modalities of the future.
It's an interesting time for Salt Lake City, right? Because we're kind of small enough and yet we're growing so quickly that we have the option to be intentional about how we grow. And I think that's really fascinating because a lot of cities, it kind of seems as though they're doing it in retrospect. We're growing, let's add all those things. And it's much harder to do so after the fact, after there's millions of people in the city. Jason, I know this is something that you're really passionate about. You actually came back to Salt Lake City from Denver with the goal of trying to make Salt Lake City, the city, a better, more livable, workable space. Can you kind of talk about that inspiration?
Sure, I'd love to, and I'll wrap it around the context that Mayor Mendenhall and Nick both brought forward. We are big believers in build it and they will come. I mean, you have to build the right thing for the people to come, but if you know what is needed, sometimes it's that leap of faith to do that, build it and they will come. And I think when it comes to, even we also say, during COVID, we've said, let's make lemonade out of the lemons. And I think the street closures that we were just talking about are a great example of you almost need, you can take advantage, if you will, of this kind of emergency situation to try something that everybody here and probably most of the people viewing, yeah, people are going to like that, right? It's not a surprise that closing some streets and making them pedestrian and bike friendly is going to be a hit with people, and it's going to be really, really popular and people are going to like it. So I love the build it and they will come on the public sector side, where Mayor Mendenhall and Nick and their expansive teams can do these things. And that's what we try to do on the development side. And so as far as us moving to Salt Lake and making Salt Lake City the next outpost for industry and the neighborhood we're building around it, we just saw all the great things, I think, that each of us sees in Salt Lake. And the move, I think, in our country, which will also be, I think, pushed forward from the aftermath of COVID, the move to cities that are focused on lifestyle and focused on a work-life balance and are laid out in such a way that you can live close to where you work and have all the things close together, your work, your recreation, your home, your shopping, all those things. And so that's what we're all about with industry and with Q Factor and the developments that we work on. And the Granary just absolutely jumped out at us as the perfect place for that. And working on exactly the types of things that we were talking about from the public sector, we're looking to do those same things on the development side.
That's awesome. We actually did get a question from YouTube about this. One person wants to know what's being done to improve bike infrastructure specifically for families, because if we want to build it and they will come and have bike lanes that we can actually have families living in the city and the kids can be on the bikes and that's safe, how can we build this in a way that it is actually a thing that we could all do?
Well, can I take a stab? And I know Nick has things about this too, but I'll mention that the housing piece of this is really important because the vast majority of housing sizes, types that we've seen constructed, the thousands of units over the last several years, are 1 bedroom and smaller. There's some 2 bedrooms, there's few 3 bedrooms, and almost nothing larger than that. And so we are focused on that need for family-sized housing in our future housing construction, apartment construction, condo, townhome, all of that. So that's a piece of it. But we know also from research that's happened mostly in the northwest part of the United States that when you do a protected bike lane, the willingness of people to travel by bike increases dramatically. So that's a facet of it. We know that that's been mixed. There's been mixed reviews on that implementation that happened under the Becker administration, but we have a totally untapped asset in our city's network of alleyways. I mean, can you imagine? And if you go to San Francisco and walk through many of the alleyways that, and other parts of the country where there's mural art, there's even cities that provide grants or distribute solar lighting so people don't have to run lighting out to the back of their garage, but they can create an alleyway that is creates more safety, but also walkability during nighttime. There's a lot of creative ways that cities are going around the necessary need for just more on-street infrastructure and activating our alleyways. So I actually have a meeting this afternoon with Councilmember Darren Mono, who represents District 5, which I used to represent. I was the lone wolf on the council for a long time, loving on alleyways and voting no on the closure of most of the alleyway requests that came our way because it's just an incredible asset that we have yet to tap. So I think that's a huge opportunity for families to feel like they can commute through the city, travel through the city safely.
Yeah, and I would add to that and maybe just add some numbers to some of these things. So if you look downtown, most streets are 132 feet wide, and we're dedicating less than 5% of them to people, whether that's walking or streets without bike lanes. And so 20% of our population can't drive a car, but we're only giving them 5% of the space. And so if we were to increase all of those distances, 10 feet, minimum 10-foot wide sidewalks, minimum 10-foot wide separated bike lanes, 10 feet for green space, we're still at only 55%. 55% of our rights of way are still be allocated to cars. And so we have plenty of opportunity. This is the one benefit that I think Salt Lake City hasn't tapped, that many other cities have struggled with, because they do have narrower right of ways. So we need to flip that script of how we view our streets. Streets, if you really think about their history, they were created as the original traditional public forum where people conducted business, they acquired all their needs, they socialized, they let their voices be heard. And for the last 100 years now, we've turned all of those things over to a vehicle. And so we're really struggling to find those needs that haven't gone away in other places. And so we really do need to rethink our streets as public spaces. And a big part of that is making sure that everybody feels safe, regardless of how they move around. And it's same with transit. But if you could think of, if you were able to increase the bike share, the number of people moving by bike, and if it could take 20% of the cars off the road, I mean, that's a huge number, but it's happened in other places. A lot of people look to Europe and various cities, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, et cetera, and what they've done with biking. They were car centric 30 or 40 years ago, and they've completely changed that because they set goals that were attainable. They stuck to it, and they're prospering as a result.
I like that as a benefit towards equality. That's an interesting, let everybody, even people who don't have access to cars, give them more space. I love that. You've also talked about requiring outdoor space, just not even just transportation space, but outdoor space for multifamily buildings. Erin, you've talked a lot about funding public parks and protected open spaces for trail systems, both becoming very important right now, and we're living at home and working at home. Are we working towards that as a city as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And our transit master plan contemplates things like our 9 line, which we have now secured funding, part of it through a grant, part of it through the streets bond that we did with some of the funding, our future dollars a couple of years ago. And things like the Folsom Trail, which is going to be under construction this fall. These are trails that, some of them are trails that we acquired through rail right of ways that we've picked up over the years and never developed. Other parts, like the 9 line, are us looking at our, 8 ox U-turn radius of some of our streets and saying, as Nick just said, we don't really need all of that for vehicles. And so we're going to be bumping into the street and making a giant sidewalk along 900 South, connecting our 9th and 9th West with our 9th and 9th East and beyond in both directions, so that people have these options and they're connected to the businesses along these routes. But check out our transit master plan if you haven't. It has a whole trail system. And in addition to that, we did just amid COVID and the decline in front of us, it's such a priority of ours to begin to build out our foothill trail master plan that we recently adopted as a city, that I think the council is set to approve the budget next week, but we're looking at over $500,000 going into that system right away. Jason, I think you wanted to jump in.
Oh, thank you. I was going to add earlier, but it fits just as well here. Some of the folks in Copenhagen, for example, talk about when they transitioned from being car-centric and they moved over to being bike and pedestrian focused, that there was a build it and they will come mentality, but also there was a perfect being the enemy of the good mentality that helped them when they realized that they didn't have to have, for example, separated bike lanes. yes, the perfect design is a raised, separated bike lane. We know what that looks like. It's amazing when you're on one. It feels great. It feels safe. But sometimes there's an interim step where just with temporary curb, basically parking blocks, you can create a separated bike lane that is nearly as effective. And you can do that in 5 places or 10 places and see which ones are most effective and most used. And then 2 years later, put the money in to do it the perfect way. And they did a lot of that in these cities that have transitioned. Sometimes even just paint, as dumb as this sounds, was enough on the road to really show people how to use it in a new way. And so some of these creative measures, and again, maybe coming out of COVID, some of these creative measures will drive some of these initiatives that might be even experimental, and you can do 5 and keep 1 in the long term with that kind of almost guerrilla urbanism. But maybe you guys are lucky enough to do it as a city and not be a guerrilla, but use that methodology.
I wanted to add in here, because there is a lot of street construction and trail construction coming at Salt Lake City in the next several years, which we sorely need on the streets upkeep side. I know that we hear from people wanting our streets repaired from a driving perspective. We hear from plenty of cyclists too, who talk about accidents they've incurred or near tragic misses from a pothole that they land in. So street maintenance needs to be a piece of this, because our streets are in really bad condition. The majority of our streets are. But something new, speaking of the city of the future, I watched in Minneapolis and St. Paul years ago that they have a small business support program that they've built into the planning of every streets construction project that the city undertakes. This is something that Salt Lake City we're just beginning to do. And we want to be building into part of the construction budget a percentage, a set percentage, we know it's going to be there, where the city supports the adjacent businesses during the construction time with marketing, wayfinding, and other means to help keep these businesses aloft. Because we're growing, we know gentrification is happening. By the way, we're doing a gentrification mitigation plan as a city. We've never done that before. It has to do with businesses. It's also about neighborhoods and keeping our communities intact. But part of that has to be that when we're going to be improving the area, we need to be helping to sustain the businesses that are they're the heartbeat of who Salt Lake City is, our small business communities are. And so that's something in the future that I'm really proud of our teams for putting together. But we've got to take care of the small businesses that define who we are.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of assent on the YouTube channel right now. Everyone's, yes, we want to do this. I want a more walkable, livable city. I'm so about this. I'm seeing a couple people raise some challenges as to how we're going to get there in the next 5 to 10 years. Specifically, what are we going to do about the homeless population that lives in Salt Lake City? And also, hey, I want to live in downtown Salt Lake City and have this livable, workable life, but all these luxury apartment buildings are going up and they're not very affordable for me. So how, if we're going to grow and make this city this, picture we're talking about, can we address those challenges?
Yeah, I think on the land use side, particularly the housing, I think if you have to look back at the history of zoning in the United States, and Salt Lake City is no different, in how cities change over time. Every city changes. It's always changing. And unfortunately, zoning tried to prescribe almost a snow globe approach to the city. And it really limited where housing could be built, what type of housing can be built, and how that housing is accessed and used and everything else. And so one of the things that we're working on right now is we call it our affordable housing overlay, which really is a way to incentivize housing within development citywide in every neighborhood, whether it's adding smaller types of single family homes or ADUs, or increasing the number of apartment units or condo units or townhomes or cottage style homes, homes on alleys, all of these things, trying to find ways that if they're affordable, that rules can be modified, the zoning can be modified by staff to promote that. And so it helps offset the cost. I think one of the things that's really kind of forgotten is that it costs almost as much to the cost to build a dwelling unit is the cost to build a dwelling unit, whether it's luxury or affordable. And so how can we minimize that and reduce that? And when we have our limiting supply for 20, 30 years in the city, even though we've added 40 or 50,000 new people, the result of that is housing is going to increase. And when you have a desirable place to live and the demand goes up, supply stays low, it's going to go up astronomically. And that is what we are experiencing. And so our housing prices are going up without the same similar change in wages. It's making housing more affordable or unaffordable, sorry. And so looking at zoning is a huge piece of that and changing that. And we have a number of things that we're working on in our multifamily zones and other things. And I think part of the reality is that when you look at how the city is zoned, you can only build housing on 20% of the land in the city. And that 20% of land has to compete with all the other land uses out there. And so it oftentimes isn't the biggest bang for the buck for the property owner to develop housing. And so how can we incentivize that? And that's a huge challenge that we're facing. But we're also a little bit lucky in that we haven't gotten to the point where a lot of other cities have. And so hopefully with some key changes through this affordable housing overlay and some other things that we're working on with like the RMF zones or multifamily zones, we can get a little bit further ahead of that curve and help with that going down the road.
Can I address the homeless question first? There's an ongoing commission that works with service providers, county partners, the city, folks from the state, DWS, in talking about the management of the collective system as we've shifted now to shelter the homeless and the homeless resource centers that operate under that nonprofit organization. There's a committee of some of those folks who, and including the city, David Litvak represents the city on my behalf, that are coming up with a strategy for this winter, because we know we're going to need emergency shelter. And the former Sugar House DI, that was my sort of the first lift of my administration as I came in, knowing that I didn't want to see someone die on our streets who we knew had tried to access shelter at one of the homeless resource centers before we acted to create emergency shelter. And it was amazing that we could bring together all of the partners and open that shelter up, which slept about 140 people a night. That property is going to be developed. It's been owned by the city for a while, and that's in process. And we knew that all along. So where do we put an emergency shelter? Does it necessarily need to be in Salt Lake City again? We're open to the conversation, but these experts are putting together some proposals, and that should be out the first week of July. So watch for that, and you can find out about it through county or city streams. Next piece, I wanted to mention the need for housing. We know we're growing. We're kind of unique. We know we're the fastest growing city in the country. Isn't that right, Jason? We're at 16.2%.
I think that's right.
For future population, but we have a lot of land as a city. We have a lot of funky little pieces of weird shaped parcels too. We have just in the last couple of weeks actually begun to finally get our arms around what do we even own? What is it currently zoned? What's the size of it? What's it proximate to? So that we can leverage this incredible asset we have as a city in contemplating the city of the future that we know we need to build. Land is a major opportunity for us. Another one would be, again, our city streets. There is width in some streets that the city could contemplate changing into other uses, perhaps even mid-block activations, which we saw some of in the past in the Granary, some experimental stuff done. Accessory dwelling units, the mother-in-law apartments. West Side neighborhoods in particular have some pretty significant sized lots in some of the Glendale and Poplar Grove areas in particular. There are cities like Austin who have nonprofit organizations that are helping residents who have never been a developer before navigate the city processes and the development processes to put a mother-in-law apartment in the back of their lot and have a new revenue stream, help communities who are seeing their property values and taxes increase, but not seeing wages increase, be able to sustain in our community. And that is an untapped asset. So I'm grateful that we were able to pass the ADU ordinance a couple of years ago. But now we need to get to work on making sure that people can access that, both to create the housing and to preserve people who are in our communities today. So that's just a little bit. Tiny homes is another one that I know Nick's team is I hope, excited to work on, because we don't allow tiny homes in Salt Lake City per our ordinance today. That's absolutely something that we should be looking at. And again, it could be another opportunity for some of those funny and smaller size parcels that the city owns to consider how new style of housing development on. Just a few ideas. It's one of my favorites.
And I would piggyback on what you both said there. You guys, and Nick, you hit it on the head with, there's a supply and demand issue, and price is just a reflection of the supply compared to the demand. And so clearly we need more housing units in Salt Lake City. And so cost of construction is one piece, but in addition to that, being able to streamline the process. And for an ADU, it's important for someone who's going to develop one thing ever in their life, and it's an ADU. They can't learn this pretty convoluted process of developing and building, and so they need a template to do it, and that will help those units. Even on the larger scale, streamlining the process and being swift and being fast is another way that I think Salt Lake City is doing a great job, and that's the housing needs to come faster than people can pack their bags and move to Salt Lake. That's really quick. Someone can decide to do that in a month and they're here, but to build the unit that person's going to live in, whether it's a single family home or a multifamily, 200 unit apartment building, takes 2 years, 2.5 years. And so this demand is growing, and we need to do our best on the development side and work together with you guys on the city side to be ready before they get here, because when that wave comes ahead of our ability to build it, that's when the prices go up, and that's what we're experiencing. So it's a timing thing as well as a total cost thing.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is that when you look at the world and how, particularly how innovation happens, there's usually some big disruption that somebody throws something, a new wrinkle in there. The scooters are a perfect example of that recently. The housing and construction market really hasn't had that yet, and so we're still building things the same way we built them for 100 years, but we're just starting to see some changes in that. And so that has the potential to be able to result in housing being constructed much quicker. We have a project on the west side of downtown right now that's trying to do some of that with some more of a prefab, taller building type of thing. There was a hotel in LA that all the rooms were built as modules off-site and then stacked within a matter of weeks. So it's those kinds of things are the next big thing. And as a city, because we have to be the inspectors and the regulators of those things, we need to be able to get in front of that so that we're not playing catch up, and that we're not being a barrier, and that we can be partners in making that happen.
I definitely want to switch over to the business side now, because the housing side, I think, is also a reflection of, okay, these businesses are moving here. There needs to be housing for all of them. But I also want to talk about getting businesses to move into the city, because if we want to become this urban, walkable, bikeable, we can get to the grocery store on foot, and our jobs are here and there's less cars, that does require a lot of our offices to be here. And I know historically, it's been very expensive for large businesses to move into Salt Lake City downtown. And as a result, they've dispersed to the suburbs, and we've created somewhat of a sprawl. And if we're going to be intentional about what we're creating here, how are we going to develop the city for businesses, large businesses who want to come in and be part of that urban environment?
I think that.
Go ahead,
please
Jason.
go.
I'll go after.
I think a lot of that really is about being intentional, and I think one of the barriers, it's kind of a snowball effect, where if you don't have a walkable, livable, amenitized city, the folks that are coming, especially from bigger cities, aren't going to be attracted to put their offices in those places. So I think starting that ball rolling just continues the ball rolling, as simple as that sounds. And I think the realization is there around the country that Salt Lake City is not just where you go skiing, for spring break with your kids. It's where you can come, to get all that lifestyle that you want on vacation, but there's a great city there too. And so I think that realization is there, and it's going to start and it's going to snowball. And then, of course, when more people work downtown, you need more bars, restaurants, different lifestyle elements, then you need more housing. So one of those things in that cycle kind of makes the other one grow. But what that requires is foresight. And so I, from an office perspective, I can tell you that when we were not yet in Salt Lake and we were looking at what was downtown, there was not a lot of inventory downtown. And so that you could almost say the demand wasn't there because there wasn't anything that they could be looking to lease downtown. So again, that snowball effect was a big piece of it. And so what we've been looking at with our project industry is the ability to bring large office spaces and small office spaces online quickly by using beautiful warehouses. And we've got the advantage of adaptive reuse. And so we can turn that space really quickly. And it's been overwhelming how many folks want to be officing downtown, and when the right space is there, they want to jump on it. And so we're seeing a lot of interest. That being said, those people all want to know, where's the nearest restaurant, where's the nearest bar, where is the nearest place to go shopping, grocery store, where's the nearest apartment building. So that ball's rolling, and I think we have to be really, really, really intentional about putting those things in the right places and putting them together for those folks that want that perfect combination.
There's
Yeah.
so many roles for the city in that too, and Jason and Ellen and their and industry's investment in the Granary District is a tipping point for that area, but really for our whole downtown, because and we don't have to get into all the aspects of opportunity zones, but suffice it to say that there are hundreds of millions of dollars being cranked into Salt Lake City right now through opportunity zone overlays. And in addition to that, I think Jason speaks to this better than any of us, but that it's very unique that you would find such an underutilized area, really a whole neighborhood such as the Granary, adjacent to a capital city's downtown core. And therefore that we have an opportunity zone overlay on it. But we also have things, which is where the city comes in many regards, like the infrastructure in there is pretty terrible. And if you drive up 4th West, you know what I'm talking about. There's old rail in there that hasn't been used in decades probably, but it's very expensive to remove, and we haven't generated the tax increment previous to now to be able to fund that kind of investment. And our transit master plan, again, contemplates a 4th West rail line that sort of acts as a pressure release valve from the downtown rail system. And we are growing so fast, and there is so much investment in that area right now that I want to see that 4th West rail developed as soon as possible. We also have tools like the Transportation Reinvestment Zone tool, the TRZ, that was created a couple of years ago by the legislature, but has never been used yet in the state of Utah. Plus the potential opportunities, thanks to COVID. I don't mean to say that way, but because of the COVID conversations at the federal level, where we're hearing the feds may want to help cities invest in transportation projects. So if we could get rail in an area like 4th West, that is still very much yet to be developed, but there's investment happening right now. We change the scale of that entire neighborhood. We change the accessibility. We change how many stinking parking spaces we need to build, which is expensive and frankly a waste of our future space. And so anyway, there's places where the city can be a major lever, not just making sure that there's stripes painted finally on the streets in the Granary District, but that we're building for the future, and the future is not that far away. I want to also mention, in terms of businesses, that we're pretty passionate about building Tech Lake City, and that I announced at the State of the City earlier in the spring that we would be designating a corridor, a tech corridor, specifically around life science. between about the Warm Springs area and the Gateway. But this whole area, west side area of our city, going down into the Granary and potentially even into the ballpark area is incredibly attractive to companies. I think tech companies in particular, whose talent want to live in that sort of an urbanized setting. So there's, I think just even the designation of an area and the city working with intention with companies who are already here and to attract companies that are curious about coming here, our potential is limitless. And then we're bringing in jobs that are the highest paying jobs by industry in the state of Utah, and who focus on diversity, I think, more than any other industry sector that we break out. And these are obviously values of us as a capital city.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it too is that as a city, we have to acknowledge that it is much more challenging to develop in an urban downtown than it is out in the suburb. And as a result, we have an obligation to do what we can to offset that. If this is the kind of development we want, which it's all in our master plans and our other policies, then we need to align our services that we provide. Closing down travel lanes for staging of construction equipment and erecting cranes and covering sidewalks to protect people during construction are all expenses that other places don't necessarily have. And so when we don't have the policies and the rules that align with that and help offset that, that's a problem. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at. We've been working with the fire department to waive some of the aerial access requirements downtown to make that easier. We recognize that if we're not aligning our policies with our inspections and our permitting processes and everything else, that we're being a barrier. And so we have to find ways to do that, whether it's the list, an additional thing, or the list of land uses, right? Like, it's crazy that our ordinance, tech has been around for 30 years and our ordinance hasn't really addressed it, and so in those regards, we are somewhat behind. And those are examples of things that the city can do to help improve the environment to get the development that we desire to happen and help our development community partners to realize it.
And I would piggyback on that, Nick, a little bit also to point out that even the way that you both just talked about leading that Fourth West corridor and looking at the need that's coming in the future, and then also talking about wanting to remove barriers, that awareness is also bringing people into Salt Lake City, companies, I mean. So when people are either scouting 3 cities for their relocation from a different market, or a satellite for a San Francisco tech company, or whatever that is, when those folks are scouting 3 locations and they can come to Salt Lake, here are people like myself say, hey, I have this director of planning say this and this and this, and our mayor says this and this and this. That has a huge effect on those people understanding what Salt Lake City is all about. And so just knowing it's coming is a big piece of the battle in and of itself.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, thank you.
Elle, can I add something else here? Back to the city's property opportunities, Station Center, which is that whole area between the Rio Grande Depot and the intermodal hub downtown, is an RDA project area. And we've made some changes in our approach to developing that I'm excited about. And so stay tuned, because that is an incredibly opportunistic area for our city. It should be a gateway to our downtown from the intermodal hub area. It should include housing, it should include tech, and it should include space for startup businesses as well. And everything from barbershops and bars and restaurants to art spaces and creatives. And so there's the Station Center area, I think, is something you can look forward to. And then the Fleet Block right off of Fourth West that the city's owned for decades, Nick. And administrations have sat on. We are not going to sit any longer. And I believe that the Fleet Block, which is it's just south of Fisher Brewery, it's between 8th South, 9th and 9th South, and 3rd West and 4th West. The city owns just over 80% of that parcel, that block. And I want it to be as though our downtown reached out and said, this is where we're going. I want it to visually attract. I think the scale of development is pretty great for us there, but the opportunity for us to build a place that even if you don't live there or work there, you want to go there. You want to go there after work. You want to go there on the weekend. You want to walk your dog through there because it's energized with the diversity of people that make Salt Lake City awesome, and that it's a place that's accessible for everyone, and it's creative and it's innovative. And I think it should be that from the moment we stick a shovel in the ground. I want to even explore ways that we can bring apprentices into the entire construction process of it. So Fleet Block as one of the jewels in the Granary District to come is coming soon to Salt Lake.
Awesome. All right, I want to end with some dreaming here. So what would you like to see Salt Lake City look like in the next 25, 50 years? And maybe what have you seen other cities do well that you would really love to see done here?
Who wants to start? I mean,
Wow.
I'll start. I think that I would really love to see Salt Lake City become a 15-minute city, full of neighborhoods where people can live and acquire everything they need for their daily lives without having to use a car. And there's all kinds of examples out there all around the world. I think one really interesting example that translates very well to Salt Lake City are the Barcelona superblocks, where they've closed off the local streets, the neighborhood streets, and they've turned them into parks and play streets, and activating them with just people being outside aligns very well with how we were originally laid out in our big field surveys and going way back to the Plat of Zion and everything else. And so it helps reduce one of the things we hear a lot are that people cut through traffic and people speeding, and these kinds of ideas really help with that. And because we were historically built around the streetcar, our layout is already primed for that. And so we can do it. We need to make those intentional changes. We need to have a commitment to it. But we can do it, and it helps achieve all of our goals. It helps provide cleaner air, all the sustainability goals that the city has, and improves our quality of life.
I love that, Nick. And I'll jump in next because the mayor certainly gets to back clean up on this one because what you say will be best, and you get to make it happen most directly. But love everything that you put out there, Nick. And I think you touched on what I see when I squint my eyes and think about Salt Lake City. I think the biggest driver is being people centric, and we've said it a whole bunch of different ways. That's getting rid of cars and creating better, denser use areas. When we talked earlier about lanes of traffic, they've done studies to say how many people can travel in a lane of car traffic versus a lane that same horizontal distance of bike and then pedestrian, and it gets bigger as you go up. And so creating kind of those smaller spaces where more people can be and they can be more effectively is what I see. And when I think about all the space that Salt Lake City has in its already existing grid, I think the opportunity is there in a way that places like Portland and even Denver are strangled for space. And so those areas, they don't have enough of them and they have to actually cut out cars completely. We have such an opportunity to make those spaces great and to rethink them. And so when I squint my eyes, I see smart density in Salt Lake City, and I see a lifestyle balance. And I don't think there's another city in the country that has the proximity to the outdoors with a perfect urban core with the space to do it right. And so as our dense downtown, I think it's going to grow and be higher for a much larger area. It's going to grow from that center height. And as we do that, we have the opportunity to make it really livable, really walkable, and really balanced. And so, you look at areas of Portland that have done it well, but then areas that are not that great. We can avoid those pitfalls. You look at Austin, that is completely, it's lifestyle focused, so it's great, but it's gridlocked and it's mass transit can never catch up, and it's so stuck and traffic ridden. And so we can avoid all those pitfalls and really take the best pieces from all these really, really great cities, and we're going to have them all in Salt Lake City.
Yes, and yes. And I think that we have all of these ingredients at our fingertips. We're a city that's not afraid of innovation. We're not trying to build the city that we grew up in for our kids. And I don't believe our kids are going to want to build the city they grew up in for their kids. But we want to build a city where everyone can be here. Everyone who wants to be here can be here. And it's not that you have to be in a certain part of the city based on what you make. It's that every neighborhood is amplified, that the characteristics of it, the cultures of the neighborhoods are supported, that we're proud of them, and that when you go out for coffee and you say, let's meet at 9th and 9th, you have to ask, do you mean 9th and 9th West or 9th and 9th East? Because the accessibility and the fabric of culture and of people is tangible in every neighborhood of Salt Lake City. And to achieve that, and to make a city that's truly accessible to people, we have to get our hands into, which I think you're seeing Salt Lake City do. And let me say, every single day we're learning, every single day we're saying, what did we do today that we would do differently the next time we do this? So we're not done. We're never going to be done. But we have to get our hands into the fact that the average household spends 20% of its income on transportation costs right now. We've got multi-car families, multi-car couples in Salt Lake City because that's kind of what you have to do to get around. Like, we've got to undo this. We have to make transportation more accessible for all of our residents. And it's going to take investment, but it's also going to take zoning. So we have to get into geographic equity, where right now there are barriers or there are accelerators to success. All of those measures of success, like healthcare, education, food equity, economic equity, capital to start a business, is predetermined to some extent, to a large extent, based on what zip code you're in. That is messed up, people. And I think that mindset of plenty is something that's not hard to find in a Salt Laker. And it may be different the farther you go out from an urbanized area, but here I think that I know that we believe that there is enough for everyone. And that as we grow our city with this kind of intention, and we invest in our people, and we invest in the small businesses, which make up 90% of the businesses in this city, we are intrinsically attracting the kind of investment that we want in this city, the kind of industries that we want in this city. And by amplifying our people, we end up attracting the good that we need, and that helps us grow and iterate along the way. So I know this is a time of heartbreak and vulnerability. And I recognize the privilege of my skin in being on this panel with all of you today and the access to the conversation. Therein, I see the future of Salt Lake City. You asked 25, 50 years, I hope even before that, where we see some of the faces of leadership that we're seeing in our communities today in this office, in our Capitol, in Congress, because the representation matters. People need to vote. People need to sign up. Women in Utah are the most underutilized voting bracket right now. There are hundreds of thousands of women who can vote and are not registered to vote in the state of Utah. So fill it out. I actually just did this right before this meeting. Like, this is happening, people. We are voting right now. So sorry, it's a soapbox. Yes to Nick, yes to Jason. And if I could have another hour with you, Elle, we could talk about that broader future of Salt Lake, and I'd love to.
Okay, well, what about cities that are doing it well, Erin? Do you have a city that you're like, yes, what they're doing, I want that here?
In pieces, yes, I do. And because we talked about housing, I'll bring up Austin, which is partnered with the Alley Flat Initiative. They're a nonprofit organization. They were actually one of the winners of the Ivory Prize. Ivory Homes does a really cool thing with housing development across the nation. And last year they were one of the awardees. But check it out, Austin Alley Flat Initiative. It's a nonprofit that helps navigate that space, as we talked about earlier. We look at trails and connectivity. I mean, Chicago, New York City, but smaller cities too, who are figuring out ways to interlace that open space, which doesn't have to be a regional park. It can really be just that McClellan Trail that you walk your dog on every evening, or that you feel safe letting your toddler learn how to ride a bike on. So there are cities large and small that we look to. I think the gentrification aspects is sort of cutting edge in cities right now. I know that Boston has a cool way that they use impact fees essentially to put some of those dollars to a community board that is looking for ways to actively support the communities and businesses that have historically been resilient, but based on the growth we're experiencing are getting leveraged out of our cities. So I'm looking for funding tools to pump that intention into keeping our neighborhoods and our culture and the diversity of Salt Lake City alive as we grow. And then there's alleyways like up in Boise, where they have really embraced the art aspect of like owning the alley spaces and bringing local artists around. So name a subject and I'll name a city that I look to, but I don't think there's one city that's doing it all right.
What about from a personal standpoint? I think we want diversity in the city. We want big businesses in the city. We want walkable space and green space and open space and trail space. Is there anything any of you would want just for fun, like a gondola in downtown Salt Lake City that goes up the mountain, or just, dream big?
Close Main Street.
Close Main Street. Oh, that would be awesome. Walkable only?
Yeah, walking and bikes, and obviously our rail, the tracks is there.
I like that. Okay, what else?
You guys jump in. I'll step up all the time.
Well, I'm a big outdoors person, and so I would say if I could dream big, I would want everybody in the city to be able to walk to a park or open space in 10 minutes or less.
I like that.
And I would add to that park and open space can also mean a hardscape. It's just a place where people are activated. So I think the plazas, some of the hardscape plazas in cities are so active. And I see so much more of that in Salt Lake City, because you can bring so many people together and do 10 different things on an outdoor plaza in an urban environment.
I think more art in our downtown, more active art, all of the facets of an active art community help to build everything that we've talked about on this call today. And prioritizing the investment in art as a city to a greater degree, and also building that into the financing that we do through our redevelopment agency and also through our housing funding to make sure that our development that we participate in is prioritizing art. I'd also say, think about our alleyways in the downtown area and flipping businesses to face the alleyways. And Sydney's one of those cities, but there are cities in Europe also that, all these bars and restaurants have back doors that right now lead to the dumpster situation in the alleyway. But they've figured out how to still allow for those fundamental functions to happen with the businesses, but have spaces that make that human proximity closer, particularly when you have streets as wide as ours. Can you imagine alleyways that have lighting and there's little outdoor dining spaces and you can access the bookstore through the back? And I mean, this is happening in cities around the world. And honestly, alleyways are a huge opportunity for us.
Yeah,
I would love to replace all the alleyways with throughways and beautiful space. And you know what else? I would love to see lawns turned into gardens. I really love that.
Culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say one other thing that kind of underlines all of this is that we have to be a city where everybody feels safe all the time, whether they're in their house, they have a place to sleep at night, they're safe taking the second they step off their porch and walk down the street. And I think a lot of recent events are highlighting that. When you look at the pandemic, the racial issues that are going on in the country right now, they are all based on the same thing, and that is having safe public places to be. And I think that is the underlying issue, I think, in most cities. And so, but everything we do should have that as a backdrop of the lens and the ultimate goal.
Amen, Nick.
Absolutely. I love it. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being on this call today. I really appreciate it. Sounds like the future of Salt Lake City is very, very awesome, and I'm into it. So thank you all for being a part of creating that future. I'm really excited to see it all play out. And we'll talk next week on the live stream.
Thank you all.
Thank you.